Let me make one quick point about God in the Bible.
There's nothing quick about what you're doing, Dinesh. There's nothing quick about what you're doing. I need to be allowed to respond to what you're saying. I am getting sick whenever I have these conversations.
You're cross-examining me on the justice of smiting the Amalekites. Honestly, I don't see any justice in it, but I do agree that was the eye for an eye ethic of the Old Testament that is repudiated and transformed and transfigured in the New.
I've had this conversation so many times, most recently with William Lane Craig. At least he had the gall to just tell me that yes, that was a moral thing for God to do. I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide by some vague reference to the fact that Jesus came along to do something which somehow kind of undoes the immorality of it. Like, this is not an eye for an eye. This is a genocide of combatant men, innocent women, and children, and animals. Saul is punished by God for not killing all of the animals. Like
that is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening. Let me just make
a quick point. I have to make this point.
Okay.
I've got to read the text from Joshua as well.
Okay, and then we'll check in with the audience, because we're probably, I think the audience is going to agree that we want this to keep going.
No, that's fine.
Instead of going to Q&A, but we'll check in just after Alex's point here.
I think it's important, read these texts for yourself. There is no way that I'm misreading this text. We know that this is what's happening. In the slaughter of Ai, that's a type of Canaanite. In Joshua, we're told that when Israel had finished killing all of the men in Ai, in the fields and in the wilderness, where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. That is to say that we're told that this is just because the promised land was inhabited, and God's God, he's allowed to do this. So because the Israelites want that land, they have to go and chase out the Ai. So they chase them into the wilderness. They chase after them. They slaughter them in the wilderness. They then turn around, come back into the city, and kill who's left. Who's left if the combatants have run away? The women and the children. This is intolerable, and I cannot have it simply waved away.
All right, hang on.
Jesus.
Let me just for a second.
It can't happen. It can't keep happening.
You're completely blind to the irony of what you're saying.
Dinesh, can we pause for just a second?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone who wants to go to Q&A right now, make a loud noise. Everyone who wants the discussion to continue on and eat up the Q&A time, cheer. Okay, sorry guys, we're gonna let them roll through Q&A.
All right.
We might have some time.
Christianity invented the just war tradition, according to which the slaughter of women and children is out of bounds. Prior to Christianity, no one thought this. Everybody did it, and everybody today does it everywhere in the world, and we do it too. The bombing of Dresden, the bombing of Hamburg, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The incineration of women and children is the normal course of war. I just watched a World War II documentary in which they interview an old bomber, a U.S. bomber pilot, and he goes, I was given a bombing mission to hit a target. I asked the U.S. authorities, who's in the building? They said 20,000 women and children. And this guy kind of breaks down. You can watch this on Netflix. And he goes, I'm like, what the hell? You want me to kill 20,000 women and children? He goes, we're supposed to be the good guys. And he goes, but I couldn't repudiate the order. It was an order, so I did it. So what I'm getting at is
that everybody does it.
It is not ethical. It is not. But I'm simply saying, Alex, that you are a product of the Christian morality that repudiates it now. You're standing on a Christian mountain and acting like, whoa, look at these Christians. They taught you to talk like this.
These people did not teach me to think like that.
They did.
These people were listening to their God who was telling them to slaughter innocent women and
children.
That's right.
The ancient Israelites were. But the ancient Israelites are not what taught you. What taught you is the 1,000-year tradition of the early Christian church,
which came a bit too late for the Amalekites.
It came a bit too late for the Amalekites, to be sure.
Were the Israelite armies not instructed by the God that you believe in?
They were instructed by God.
And they were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Absolutely.
So God has commanded them to do something which you now consider to be immoral, whether or not you consider it to be immoral because of the later developments of Christian ethics. God himself has told us that we must abandon our intuition that the slaughter of women and children, and by the way, when it's unnecessary in those instances to slaughter them,
I don't view it that way. This is how I view it. let's put it this way. Even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world, which is full of a lot of really bad guys.
And God says, keep going.
No,
Keep it up. You're doing such a good job.
God does not say keep going. But what God does is and again, this is called, trying to get the point of what is happening. There's slavery in this world, in the ancient world, and it is true. The Bible doesn't come in and go, we denounce slavery, we denounce the killing of women and children. It doesn't do that.
The opposite.
It actually immerses itself into an existing, admittedly barbaric culture. And what's actually going on there with the Amalekites, the Canaanites, and so on, if you just read the Old Testament, it tells you. It has to do with the displacement of polytheism with monotheism.
Oh, that's fine.
Hold on.
That justifies the murder of children and women.
I didn't say it does.
That's what you're implying.
I'm saying
Otherwise
that the
you wouldn't
way
be
it
talking about
happens historically is God takes a side. The single monotheistic God, who, by the way, in the Old Testament does not act like a monotheistic God. He acts like a tribal God. Right? He acts like the God of only the Israelites.
And so Israel's enemies... Listen to what you just said. The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
The God of the... Yes, the God that is depicted in the Old Testament is... He goes, I'm picking the Jews. Yes. I'm choosing you.
To the extent that
your enemies become my enemies,
to the extent that your male and female slaves may come from the nations around you. From them you may buy and sell slaves. You may also purchase some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan born in your town. You can bequeath them to your children as inheritable property. This is human beings, by the way. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So not only do we have, the description of slavery in the Old Testament, we have an explicit condoning instructions on how to do it and doing it based on race.
Well, I wouldn't say based on race, because
well, how else do you interpret?
First of all, racism is an invention of the modern world.
Call it tribe if you like.
Ethnicity. These are clans.
These
are militaristic
Israelite
clans.
slaves this way, and you treat non-Israelite slaves this way. By the way that the Israelite slaves are treated, we're told in Exodus 21, if you have a male slave, they're to go free after 7 years. But if you give them a wife and they have children while they're your property, then they don't go free after 7 years, only the man does. And Exodus 21 says, but if the man decides that he loves his wife and his children and his master and wants to stay, then he can say to his master he wants to stay, at which point he's taken outside, his ear is pierced like cattle, and he becomes a slave for life. Now, by the way, female slaves aren't let go after 7 years at all in the first place. Now, I understand what you're saying when you say, okay, maybe God couldn't have abolished slavery for some reason, but at least, for example, when the male slave goes free, let his wife and children go with him.
Yeah.
Why not this simple moral improvement? There is no conceivable reason that this could not have been ordained by God, but it was not.
You have a capital argument here to be had with the rabbis, and look, there is a massive rabbinical tradition that discusses every fine point, as you know.
People that the Bible is true.
But it's not my job to
I'm not a rabbi
isolate the Old Testament from the New and justify ancient battles that have no bearing. Let me put it this way:
and tell me how specifically
if someone were to listen to you, they would have no idea that the first anti-slavery movement in the world is driven by the Quakers and the evangelical Christians. They read the same Bible, but evidently they don't read it your way, because if they read it your way, they would be the prime apologists and defenders of slavery. So
Dinesh,
you have to explain why you take a universal institution.
Dinesh, when did that happen?
In every culture.
When did that happen?
When did what happen?
When did that movement first get off the ground?
It's in America, it starts shortly after the Quakers get here. So the early let's put it this way, the early anti-slavery movements are about 1710, 1720.
Here's two hypotheses then. One hypothesis is that God actually didn't like slavery the whole time. It just took human beings literally thousands of years to work it out, and that just so happened to coincide with the Enlightenment. That's one hypothesis. Another hypothesis is actually that the Bible does condone slavery, and that what's going on is, I think, for example, when you look at the actual verses that are being given as justification for the Christian abolitionist movement, what kind of verses are we talking about?
Well, what I'm saying is that first of all, the Enlightenment...
It may have been Christians who did it, but they were, to say that they were doing it as motivated by Christianity is a different kind of claim.
It is a very significant claim because to you, the Bible exists in an interpretive tradition that has been expostulated over many centuries by Christians. They're reading that Bible. They're reading it with great care as to what it's trying to say. And the Enlightenment, far from being the origin of any of this, in fact, the racism that came out of the Enlightenment was of a species that never existed before. I mean, you think of the great philosophers like Hegel, Kant, their denunciations of blacks, for example, you'll find nothing like that in the Old Testament, leave alone the New.
And if modern Enlightenment thinkers were beholden to think that these Enlightenment thinkers were ineffable, creators of an inviolable ethic, then we'd probably have had a harder time getting rid of it, don't you think?
Well, nobody. Do you think
the abolitionist movement was helped or hindered by the existence of the verses that I've just described?
Well, I mean, I think it was hindered by them because I think that the Southern apologists of slavery appealed to those verses. To be sure, they appealed to the Old Testament verses that were pro-slavery.
Tell me where you could appeal to be anti-slavery specifically. I mean, not love your enemy, love your neighbor. Tell me specifically. Like, here's how I can put it: you're in a time machine. You go back to antebellum slavery in the American South.
Yeah.
And you find yourself on a plantation, and you say to the master of the house, you own a bunch of slaves. I don't think this is moral. I don't think you should be mistreating them. Where do they turn? And plausibly so, to justify what they're doing.
Well, the answer
they pull out
is
their
this.
Bible, and you can say to them, well, hold on, have you read this verse? Tell me the verse. Tell me where I can point this person in order to dispel them of their
So
ideas
I would
about
recommend to you a compendium of sermons that were delivered by Northern preachers in the decades leading up to the Civil War. Hold on.
I want to know what the verses
right,
are.
so
I'm
going to give you their mode of preaching because the key to it is to understand how they use the Bible. It's not the way you do it. Even the Southern theologians weren't dumb enough to say they enslaved the Amalekites, therefore you can enslave this guy who's here from the Congo. No, the Southerners didn't use those arguments either. Your arguments are in a different species altogether. If you look at the arguments between the Northerners and Southerners over slavery, they were far more nuanced than that. Basically, you had to do something like this. The Northern theologians would say this: are we or are we not created equal in the eyes of God? Yes or no? Yes. Are we all equally in need of salvation? Yes. Does God therefore love us all equally and make salvation available to us all? Yes.
And then you flip over
and
the Old
all
Testament.
that being the case, so hold on. It takes a movement now to go from this theological truth to a political application. But I don't have to prove that this is plausible because it already happened.
It's far too vague. It's
far too vague for you. From a skeptical compass, it's vague.
This always happens.
But I'm saying millions of people believed it.
This always
They
happens.
listened to these sermons. They acted on them.
That's because people retrospectively impart their own values.
Why do
onto
you
the
think?
Bible.
Why do you think people in the North who had no stake in the matter signed up to fight the Civil War? Why did they do it?
I don't know.
You have no idea, right? You have no clue.
But I don't think it's because they read the Bible.
I'm saying that do you realize to what?
Look at the sermons that are being given. Look at the language that's being used. People talk about the Exodus story, for example. The enslaved in Egypt, freed by God and brought into the Promised Land. And this is a story that is favored. This is a story that's favored by abolitionists to say, look at this anti-slavery spirit of something like Exodus, leaving out the fact that when the Israelites are liberated from Egypt and trying to take the Promised Land, they do so by slaughtering, genociding, and also then enslaving the people who were already living there. They leave out that bit. Because if they kept it in, then we'd realize that God did not have an anti-slavery essence. God had an anti-Israelite oppression sentiment.
Well,
and it's in the Old Testament specifically the Israelites whose oppression he's upset with, and not only fine with the oppression of others, but mandates the oppression of others through the Israelites.
Okay, and all I'm saying is that there is a whole tradition that involves millions of slaves, millions of abolitionist preachers, Martin Luther King. None of them, not one of them, reads this story your way.
They just don't mention it. They just don't mention it.
Right, but isn't the significance of a text determined by the reading and use to which it is put. Let's say, for example, there's a story of murder, and everybody who reads that story becomes a wonderful citizen, loves their family, and you're the only guy who goes, oh no, really, guys, you're all misreading the text. It's really about murder, guys. And Martin Luther King goes, no. Slaves for hundreds of years have taken consolation in the Exodus. I mean, go down, Moses, way down to Egypt land and tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Yep. To you, this is gobbledygook, because guess what the Israelites did next? And then Martin Luther King goes...
What did they do next?
Well, my point...
Like, what I would say to Martin Luther King, if I was trying to make
I agree about the description in the Bible. I'm simply saying that...
It's not a description, Dinesh.
A Christian book has got to be understood in the way Christians understand it. And if you come out with a quote... Let's just say, for example...
Don't put it in scare quotes. Like, you can say, go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And if I was trying to make a theological point, I would say, and then do what? What did they do next? Like, don't get me wrong. I am more than happy that Martin Luther King was able to make a theological case for the abolition of slavery. Fine, but I would say that he was...
Not for the abolition of slavery, but for civil rights.
He was misreading the text. Yeah, you're right.
We have about 5 minutes, guys.
Not the other way around. It's like, we have to ask who's misreading the text. And let's just suppose for a moment that you could point to me, which you still haven't done, to a single verse, even in the New Testament, which tells me that slavery is a bad thing. Which, by the way, St. Paul writes in... I can't remember which. I wish I could remember which letter it is. But you'll know what I'm talking about, where he writes, "Slaves, be obedient to your masters, not just the good ones, but also to the cruel," or the froward, as the King James has it. It's like, if it were the case that even if you could, which I would still love for you to do, point to a single verse in the New Testament that tells me that slavery is actually not so good, the fact that so obviously God is okay with it in the Old Testament means that even if you could do that, the best we're left with is that we have a text here which can say one thing on one day and another thing the next.
If you don't understand, if you don't read,
I'm sure I bribed more people than that on the way in. So.
If you don't read the Bible in the way that the Christians do, then I'm trying to understand what is you're essentially a kind of a new interpreter who's saying that, first of all, texts are always open to interpretation, right? So if I say, for example, the meaning of the Oedipus story is the quest for truth, no matter where that takes you. And that is the meaning of the Sophoclean hero. The Sophoclean hero is isolated, Antigone, Oedipus. They hold on to a truth no matter what, however unpleasant, however dangerous. It often takes them to their destruction or their death. And that is the way in which let's just say a student of ancient Greek drama, reads this work. And that is the way that the work has always been read. You come along and say, let's just say you're Sigmund Freud, and you go, no, to me, the work really means something completely different. People have a secret lust for their moms, and this is repressed. Now, it's a very interesting interpretation, but it's sort of like I'm telling you, no Christian reads it that way. You're like, but there it is in the text.
Sometimes, Dinesh, a genocide is just a genocide.
I'm not denying the facts as described. It's the wiping out of the Amalekites.
Yeah, as ordained by the God that you believe in.
As ordered by Yahweh.
So just to ask a direct yes or no question, I'd appreciate a direct yes or no to this. The God that you believe in is the moral author of the universe. Morally justifiably commanded the slaughter of innocent children and women. Yes or no?
In the Old Testament, yes.
There you have it. So now we've covered historical, metaphorical, allegorical, and now moral truth, and I suppose it can only be up to the audience to decide whether they think that this is true.
Fair enough. Okay.
All right, everyone, let's do a big round of applause for Dinesh and Alex. Wow.
Thank you. Sorry about the questions. Sorry. We'll be around afterwards.
No, it's all good. We do have poster printouts for all of you in the lobby, free of charge, and you can all get them signed by Alex and Dinesh. That'll be joining us in the lobby. And everyone on YouTube, thank you so much for stopping by to watch. I think we peaked at 2,000 viewers live, so that's excellent for Pangburn. Things are growing really fast. Make sure you guys subscribe and drop a like button before you head out of the stream. Thank you, everyone, so much, and I'll hang out with you guys in the lobby. I'll see you there.
And questioners, come. There'll be you can ask them there.
Yes, ask your questions in the lineup. We do have a bit of time, so. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
good.
everyone. Thanks so much.
All right, appreciate it.